Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business, which we're taking care of here on the show with our next guest, Dr. Ravi Batra. Gentleman I've been familiar with since the late 1980s when I read his book about the Great Depression of 1990, and although not as bad as it turned out as his book predicted, it was a pretty bad year. The 1990 was pretty rough, the early 1990s in particular, for many of the reasons systemically that you pointed out in that book. You're pretty sharp and have a history of being sharp when it comes to talking about potential hardship economically around the corner. And your latest book is End Unemployment Now, which we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And I do want to mention early that Dr. Batra can be found at Ravi, R-A-V-I, Batra, B-A-T-R-A.com. Dr. Batra, welcome to the program.
Thanks a lot.
You're an economist, and what school are you with currently?
Well, in this new book, I had anticipated all the things that are happening now in Europe, China, and the United States. Greece is, of course, in big trouble, but in the U.S., our poverty is the highest in more than 50 years, and that's not a good sign either. So I have explained how, first of all, what causes unemployment and poverty, and how do we fix it very easily. I mean, in the United States, at least, it can be fixed so easily. And I have mentioned how you can do it without going through Congress, because the president himself can use existing laws, not use some edicts or executive privilege, use existing laws to create competition in the economy, and that's our problem. We don't have free markets anymore. We have what we may call monopoly capitalism, where a few giant firms control prices and pay low wages, and they make their employees work very hard. The result is that production keeps rising because of high productivity of employees and because of new technology. Productivity rises and production keeps rising, but demand does not because of low wages. So production is constantly ahead of demand. So there is overproduction, and overproduction is always going to cause layoffs. And this is a problem all over the world. The problem of overproduction exists in Greece, in Europe, in China, and the United States. So that's why poverty keeps rising, even when we have spent more than $8 trillion in the past 7 years in terms of extra debt. So my whole purpose in writing this new book is how we can get rid of this poverty and even get rid of our debt despite any obstruction from Congress.
Yeah, so Dr. Batra, first of all, Say's law, supply creates its own demand. Obviously what you're saying is antithetical to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it's basically what you're conveying is what the general theory of employment, interest, and money conveyed in 1936.
Not really, because Keynes talks about, Keynes himself said only this, that in times of recession and depressions have a deficit. But when the prosperity comes back and you have a boom in the economy, then we should have a budget surplus. So he said that we should have a balanced budget over the business cycle. But for the past 30 years or so, we are constantly raising deficit, or we have a constant deficit, and so debt keeps rising, and that's not really Keynesian economics. That's pure politics, because, the problem is that whenever there is unemployment in the economy, it also creates uncertainty for the politician. The politician wants to see unemployment go away, so they use debt-creating policies, and they bring interest rates down so people would borrow more money and spend it rather than raise their wages in proportion to productivity. They make people borrow money. Also, the government borrows a lot of money and spends it so that unemployment goes away, and the whole purpose behind all that is so that the incumbent politician remains elected, because the politician is very scared of unemployment also.
Right, that's the basic problem. Isn't that the fundamental problem of the short-sightedness effect in politics? I mean, they think in terms of 2, 4, and 6-year cycles, depending on what office they hold. So they need a pretty immediate gratification.
That's right. So what I'm suggesting now is that creating more debt, more deficit, and government spending, and the Federal Reserve printing a lot of money these are not the answers to our problems, because you can see the poverty is highest in more than 50 years. So what we should do is the president, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican or independent, doesn't matter. The president should create competition for these giant firms. By creating competition, we will bring the cost down to the consumer, and that will create a tremendous jump in demand and so on. As a simple idea, as a simple example, let's look at this financial or banking industry. They are getting money nearly free from the Federal Reserve, but they are charging their consumers the same interest rate and even higher interest rates than they were in 2007. On credit card loans, they're charging something like 20 to 30% from the poor and the middle class, and the poor and the middle class can never get out of debt this way. So I'm suggesting the president can use the FDIC, which works for the president, and ask them to start a bank of their own. The FDIC is authorized by a 1987 law to start a bank for 3 years. And this is a process. What they do, they will take over a failed bank and inject some money into it to make it solvent. Once that failed bank has become solvent, that bank can also borrow money from the Federal Reserve at 0% interest rate, and then the FDIC can tell its managers to charge only 5% on credit card balances. Overnight, you have a big dent in poverty. You have a big reduction in poverty in the United States. It's overnight because every other bank will have to charge 5% also. Otherwise, customers will transfer their loan balances to the FDIC bank. Mm-hmm. And this does not require any new legislation at all. The law allows the FDIC to keep this failed bank open for up to 3 years. And in 3 years, if they create so much competition for these banks, interest rates will fall sharply. And they should fall because the banks are getting money free from the Federal Reserve, but they are squeezing the poor and the middle class dry. And so once this is done, I've calculated that this will be a windfall of about $100 billion every year to the poor and the middle class, and that's a permanent tax cut. It's not going to raise the deficit or the debt, and so you have...
Dr. Batra, I'm out of time. Dr. Ravi Batra, RaviBatra.com. Make sure you go there, check out his book. And it's an interesting approach to alleviating poverty. Wish we had more time to discuss it. Thanks so much, sir.
Thanks a lot for having me.
When we come back, much more for you right here on The Price of Business.